Have you ever dipped your finger in holy water and felt nothing? Not nothing in the sense of distraction or fatigue, but nothing because some quiet part of you assumed there was nothing to feel. Do you imagine that the small gesture at the church door is a ritual remnant, a damp habit passed down through generations, meaningful the way a familiar song is meaningful? For memory, not for power? Padre Pio saw what that water actually does, not in a vision, not in a dream. He saw it the way a soldier sees what a weapon does, because he lived on the front line of a war most people don't believe is happening. He was beaten in his cell in the dark. He bled from wounds that had no natural cause, and he kept something on the table beside his bed, something so common you've walked past it 100 times without stopping. By the time you reach the end of this, you will never touch that water the same way again. If this is reaching you, take a moment to subscribe, so the next thing Padre Pio saw finds you too. There is a small font near the entrance of almost every Catholic church in the world. It is easy to pass. Most people do not pass it. They stop, they dip a finger or two, they make the sign of the cross, and they move on. The whole thing takes perhaps 3 seconds. There's no dramatic music. There's no light from above. It's cold. It's ordinary. And for most people, it remains exactly that, ordinary. But here is what Padre Pio knew, and what the Church has always known even when her people have forgotten it. Ordinary is often just the surface of something terrifying. The invisible world does not announce itself. It does not interrupt your Tuesday. It does not glow at the edges or make itself known in ways that force you to pay attention. It is simply there, laid directly over this one, present in the same room where you drink your coffee and check your phone and forget to pray. And the invisible world has a border. The Church has always taught that there are ways to mark it, to assert it, to push back against what presses against it from the other side. Padre Pio did not believe this the way you believe a historical fact. He believed it the way a man believes in fire, because it had burned him. He was born Francesco Forgione in Pietrelcina in southern Italy in 1887. He entered the Capuchin Franciscan order as a young man and was ordained a priest in 1910. He was slight, often ill, and from the beginning of his priesthood, he suffered in ways that confounded his superiors and his doctors alike. In 1918, he received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, in his hands, feet, and side, and he bore those wounds, open and bleeding, for 50 years. 50 years, not a week, not a season. 50 years of physical suffering that no physician could explain, that never healed, that left marks on the sheets and on the floor of the confessional where he sat for hours on end. He was not a mystic who floated above ordinary life. He was a priest who got up before dawn, who celebrated Mass slowly, who heard confession for sometimes 16 or 17 hours a day. People came from every country. They waited for days. Some had tried everything: doctors, psychiatrists, pilgrimage. And they came to this small friar in a monastery in the south of Italy because something in them knew he could see what others couldn't. And he could. He saw things in the confessional that penitents had never told anyone. He smelled the perfume of souls in a state of grace, and the stench of sin in those who hadn't yet confessed it. He billicated, appeared in 2 places at once, verified by multiple independent witnesses. He had a relationship with his guardian angel so close, so ordinary and daily, that he wrote to his spiritual director about it the way a man writes about a friend. I always have this good companion beside me. This is documented. This is in his letters, preserved in 4 volumes, the Epistolario, archived and published and verified. This is who he was, a man with one foot in this world and the other in the next, a man who did not speak in comfortable abstractions about the spiritual life, because the spiritual life had left marks on his body, a man who did not guess about the invisible world, because the invisible world had entered his room and tried to kill him. You need to understand what happened in that cell at night before you can understand what he knew about the water. His letters to his spiritual director, Padre Agostino, sent from the early years of his priesthood, describe events that even now are difficult to read without something tightening in your chest. He doesn't dramatize them. He doesn't frame them for effect. He writes about them the way a man writes about something that actually happened to him, in plain language, slightly bewildered, deeply shaken. In a letter from September of 1911, he describes a night in which something entered his cell. Not metaphorically. Something appeared before him in physical form, took on the appearance of a beautiful young man, and then revealed itself for what it was. And the encounter that followed left him exhausted, trembling, and bruised. He invoked Jesus. He invoked Mary. And then it stopped. He calls the devil Il Bruto in his letters, the ugly one, and Il Nemico, the enemy. Not with theatrical flair. Those are simply the words he uses, consistently, across years of correspondence, the way you might refer to a recurring problem by its name, because you've dealt with it enough times to give it one. He was beaten. Not once. Multiple times. His confreres, the other friars at San Giovanni Rotondo, heard it through the walls. They found him afterward. The bruises were real. The marks were real. His canonization investigation, the formal Positio Super Virtutibus, the Vatican's own evidentiary record assembled over years, took these accounts seriously because there was no other way to take them. He once described the devil appearing to him in the form of his own spiritual director, wearing the face of the man who guided his soul, wearing his voice. The detail matters. The enemy does not attack in ways that are obviously hostile. He doesn't arrive as something you'd immediately recognize as dangerous. He arrives as something familiar, something trustworthy, something that almost convinces you. Padre Pio was not convinced, and the question you need to sit with, the question he spent years living inside, is this. When the attack was over, when he had resisted and survived, and the presence had withdrawn, what had made the difference? He didn't have superior strength. He wasn't invulnerable. He was a sick man in a small room in the middle of the night. He was a priest with wounds in his hands who bled when he walked. The difference was not his personal power. The difference was what he reached for. Most people who call themselves Catholic would be hard-pressed to explain what holy water actually is. Not in a dismissive sense. It's simply not the kind of thing that gets explained. You see the font. You use the font. The deeper question of what the Church claims is happening when a priest blesses that water, what changes, what is invoked, what is done, is the kind of question that sits unanswered for decades because nobody thinks to ask it. But the Church has always had an answer. It's not hidden. It's just quiet. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches, in section 1667, that sacramentals are sacred signs which bear a resemblance to the sacraments. They are not sacraments. They don't confer grace the way baptism or the Eucharist does, but they are not merely symbolic either. The Catechism is precise about this. They signify effects, particularly of a spiritual nature, which are obtained through the intercession of the Church. That phrase, through the intercession of the Church, is doing enormous theological work. It means the prayer of the Church over that water is not a human wish. It is the prayer of the bride of Christ, the body of Christ on earth, praying in Christ's authority. And that authority is not decorative. The blessing of holy water, in the traditional form preserved in the Roman ritual, the Ritual Romanum, includes something that most Catholics have never heard about. It includes an exorcism, not a gentle prayer asking God to please make the water nice. An exorcism, an explicit, formal, named command directed at evil spirits, commanding them to have no power in the water or over those who touch it. The salt that is added is also exorcised separately, before the two are commingled and the water is blessed. This is not folklore. This is not medieval superstition. It is in the published text of the Roman ritual, the Church's own liturgical book, the same document that has governed the Church's sacramental life for centuries. It is there in black and white, Before the blessing proper, there is a direct confrontation with evil, which means that every bottle of holy water blessed in the traditional rite has, embedded in its making, an act of spiritual warfare. The revised rite, the post-1969 formula, does not include this explicit exorcism. Both forms are valid. The Church does not say one is more powerful than the other, and neither should you. But the fact of the difference is worth knowing. The old rite makes explicit what the Church has always held implicit, that this water is being made into something the enemy cannot stand. This is not magic. The Church is emphatic about that. Holy water has no power apart from the prayer of the Church and the authority of Christ that prayer invokes. It is not the water's chemical properties. It is not a formula divorced from faith and the community of believers. But when the Church prays over water, when a priest consecrates it in Christ's name, something real happens to it. It becomes, in a defined theological sense, a bearer of Christ's authority over the domain of darkness. Padre Pio knew this not as a theory, but as a fact he had seen demonstrated on his own body. But there's something deeper here, something that explains why it's this water specifically. Why water at all? You've heard the word baptism so many times that it may have lost its edge. Let's get it back. At your baptism, or at the baptism of anyone you love, something happened in that water that the Catholic Church has always described in the most extreme possible terms. The devil lost you. That is not a metaphor. Catholic doctrine teaches, with full doctrinal weight, that at baptism the soul is freed from the dominion of Satan. Not weakened, not renegotiated. Freed. The claim that the enemy had over a fallen human nature, the inheritance of original sin, was canceled by water and word and the authority of Christ. The prophet Ezekiel heard it centuries before it happened. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleannesses. That passage is not about hygiene. The Church Fathers recognized it immediately as a foreshadowing of something that would happen in a specific act, with specific water, with specific spiritual consequences. When John the Apostle wrote that when the soldier pierced Christ's side, blood and water came out, the early Church read that as the origin of the sacraments. Augustine saw it. John Chrysostom saw it. The blood for the Eucharist, the water for baptism. The power of the water traces back to that wound. It is not arbitrary. It is sourced. Holy water is not a separate category of specially treated liquid. Holy water is baptismal water extended into ordinary life. When you bless yourself with it, you are not performing a pious custom. You are doing something specific in the invisible world. You are re-invoking the terms of your baptism. You are re-declaring, in this place, at this moment, that you belong to Christ and not to the one who lost you. And for a demonic entity, that re-invocation is not abstract. Think about what it means from the other side of the invisible world. Every demon that was present at your baptism was present at the moment they lost you. They know what water and the authority of Christ means. They were there when it was used against them. When they encounter holy water, when it is used by someone who knows what they're holding, they do not encounter H2O. They encounter the memory of their own defeat. The same authority that expelled them once is being applied again, here, now, to this place, to this person. That is why it burns. This is not Padre Pio's private theology. This is what trained exorcists have documented across hundreds of cases in multiple countries over decades. For Gabriele Amorth was, for many years, the chief exorcist of the Vatican. He founded the International Association of Exorcists. Over 36 years of formal exorcism ministry, he conducted hundreds of sessions with people suffering from what the Church recognizes as genuine demonic oppression or possession. He wrote about what he witnessed in 2 books, An Exorcist Tells His Story and An Exorcist More Stories, published by Ignatius Press and available to anyone. What he describes is not what people imagine when they imagine exorcism. It is not theatrical. It is not usually dramatic in the Hollywood sense. It is, in many ways, clinical, slow, careful, pastorally governed work conducted under the bishop's authority. But there are patterns, and one of the most consistent patterns Father Amorth documents is the reaction of demonically afflicted persons to holy water. Not a calm discomfort, not a vague unease, screaming, writhing, rage directed specifically at the water, verbal outbursts from the afflicted person, who in the normal state would have no reason for any of this, expressing, in the voice of something that is not that person, fury at the water and what it represents, attempts to avoid contact with it, physical reactions that cannot be explained by suggestion or psychological mechanism alone, because they are involuntary, immediate, and consistent across cases that have nothing to do with each other. Father Amorth was not a naive man. He was a trained priest, a canon lawyer, a careful thinker who spent decades distinguishing genuine possession from psychiatric illness. He was not in the business of sensationalism. What he reported was what he observed, as a pastoral clinician, with the rigor of a man who knew the difference between theater and evidence. He said explicitly that demons can be caused suffering by contact with holy water, not because of the water's physical properties, because of what the blessing invokes. The Church's authority over Satan, the authority Christ gave his Church, the authority invoked in every priestly blessing of water, is made physically manifest in those moments. The enemy is not pretending. The enemy is not performing. The enemy is reacting to something real. Padre Pio saw this. He didn't need Amorth's documentation. He had seen it from the inside. He had been on the receiving end of the attack and had experienced what stopped it. He knew what the water was because he had used it against an enemy who reacted to it, in his own room, in the dark, alone. The souls who came to him knew something was different when they sat across from him. The confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo was not a comfortable place, not in the way ordinary confessionals are. Padre Pio had a gift, documented, testified to, accepted by the Church in his canonization, of reading souls. He knew what was in a penitent before they said it. He saw things in people that people hadn't seen in themselves. He spent, at the height of his ministry, up to 16 or 17 hours a day in that confessional. Not 16 hours of polite spiritual direction, 16 hours of direct encounter with human suffering, human sin, human darkness, and with whatever accompanied it from the invisible world. He was not a gentle confessor in the sentimental sense. He was direct, sometimes sharp, but always he sent people home with something specific, not vague encouragement, not general uplift, instructions. Use the rosary. Pray it every day, not as a religious exercise, but as a weapon, because that's what it is. Get to Mass, go to confession, and use the sacramentals. Use them in your home. Use them in the rooms where your children sleep. Use the holy water. He didn't explain the theology each time. He didn't need to. He had seen what happens on the other side of the invisible world when a person actually uses what the Church has given them. He had watched the enemy react to it. He knew what happens in a room when it's blessed. He knew the difference between a protected household and an unprotected one, not because someone told him, but because he could see it. The traditional advice attributed to him, that a home should be sprinkled with holy water in every room, that it should be by the bed, that it should be near every door, is, even if not every word is traceable to a specific letter, entirely consistent with what his documented letters teach. He consistently instructed the souls under his direction to treat sacramentals as real tools in a real fight, not as pious gestures, not as cultural customs, as weapons in an actual war being fought in the invisible world around them. He once told a woman who came to him frightened in that particular way you can't quite explain to anyone who hasn't felt it, the sense that something has moved into a house, something that arrived with trouble and hasn't left. He told her, "Bless his room, bless his bed, bless the doorframe. The water remembers whose house it is. Not her house, legally or emotionally, whose house it is in the invisible world, the territory that the enemy tries to claim, room by room, through broken doors left open by sin and despair, and the long, slow drift away from God. The water, applied with faith and in the name of Christ, remarks that territory. It plants a flag that the invisible world can read. She went home. She did what he said. And the thing that had moved in, she couldn't have described it to a psychiatrist. She couldn't have proven it to a journalist. Began to leave. There was a man who came to San Giovanni Rotondo with every intention of arguing. He was educated. He had trained in a scientific field. He believed in the church, mostly, in the way that a cultural inheritance believes in itself, comfortably, at a distance. He did not believe in holy water. He believed in holy water the way he believed in old customs, with tolerance and mild affection and private certainty that anyone who took it literally was confused about the difference between metaphor and reality. He watched Padre Pio from across the piazza for several days before he got close enough to speak. What he saw was not what he expected. He expected someone performing sanctity, the deliberate, managed holiness of a public figure. What he found was a man who seemed to be carrying something enormous and doing it very quietly. A man whose eyes, when they turned toward you, felt like being seen for the first time. He found himself, despite himself, wanting to ask the question he had been telling himself was a foolish one. He asked, "Is it really the water that does something? Or is it just suggestion? The power of belief acting on the mind?" Padre Pio looked at him for a moment. Then, "Ask the one who screams when it touches him." The man was quiet for a long time, because he understood what that answer meant. The involuntary reaction of a demonic entity to holy water during exorcism is not a psychological response. It is not the penitent performing distress because they expect distress. The entity that reacts is not the same entity as the human person sitting in the chair. And that entity doesn't benefit from screaming. It doesn't choose to react. It reacts because it cannot not react. Because the water, in the authority of Christ, lands on it like fire. You don't get to explain that with suggestion. You don't get to explain it with expectation. You get to explain it with exactly what the Church has always said, that this water is not ordinary water anymore, and the enemy knows that better than you do. There was a woman who hadn't been to Mass in 11 years. This is not a judgment. It is simply a fact about where she was. She had left, not dramatically, not with anger, but with the slow fade that happens when life gets heavy and the church feels far away, and one Sunday becomes many Sundays, becomes a decade of Sundays. She still believed, somewhere underneath the silence. She still prayed, sometimes, in the way a person talks to someone they're not sure is listening. She was going through her grandmother's things after the old woman died, and in the back of a drawer she found a small blue bottle, sealed, still full. She knew immediately what it was. Her grandmother had been the kind of woman who kept holy water in every room. A small bottle here, a small bottle there, without fanfare, simply present, the way a person keeps something useful nearby. This one had been set aside, saved. The woman sat with it for a long time, and then she did what she hadn't done in 11 years. She opened it. She blessed herself. She couldn't have told you why she was crying. She wouldn't have been able to explain what happened in the invisible world in that moment. The way that simple gesture re-announced something in the territory of her soul, something that the years of absence had left unspoken. The claim that had been made at her baptism. The belonging that was never actually severed, only forgotten. Padre Pio understood this kind of moment. He wrote to one of his spiritual daughters once about the souls who drift away from the sacraments and then, without knowing why, are drawn back toward them. He didn't describe it as random. He described it as the church still praying, the saints still interceding. The grandmother on the other side of the veil, praying for the granddaughter in the drawer of ordinary days, setting something aside for the right moment. "She saved it for you," he would have said. "She knew this day would come." The Catechism teaches in section 956 that the communion of saints is real, that those who have gone before us in faith continue to intercede for those still living. This is not a pious wish, it is doctrine. The grandmother who kept the holy water was not gone, she was praying, and the small blue bottle in the drawer was the residue of a prayer that hadn't stopped. And then there is the man who woke at 3 a.m. and couldn't explain why. He was not superstitious. He would have told you that himself, quickly, as a kind of credential. He was practical. He worked with his hands. He went to Mass on Christmas and Easter, sometimes more, and he didn't think too hard about the parts that were difficult to explain. He was, in a word, ordinary, which is not a criticism. Most of us are ordinary. The invisible world does not reserve itself for the extraordinary. He woke, and the room was wrong. Not visually, not audibly, nothing you could point to. Just wrong. A weight in the air that wasn't there when he'd fallen asleep. A sense of being watched, not from outside the window, but from inside the room, from a direction that shouldn't have a direction. A dread that didn't connect to anything in his waking life. No worry he could name, no anxiety with an object. Just dread, raw and specific, the way cold is specific. He lay still for a long time, and then he reached over and turned on the light, because that was the only thing he could think to do. The light didn't help, the weight didn't lift. He had heard, somewhere, that Padre Pio kept holy water near his bed. He'd heard it the way you hear things at the margin of your attention, not as instruction, just as detail, filed away without a label. He thought about it now, at 3 a.m, in a room that was wrong. He thought about a man who had been physically attacked in his cell, who had been beaten by something the world couldn't categorize, and who had chosen, after all of that, to keep a small bottle of blessed water on the table beside his bed, not as decoration, not as a pious habit. As a response to what he had learned was real. He didn't have any. He made a mental note to get some. And then he did what Padre Pio always told his penitents to do when the sacramentals were not at hand. He made the sign of the cross, slowly, with attention, not mechanically, which is how he usually made it, if he made it at all, but deliberately, understanding for the first time that the gesture was not a greeting. It was a declaration, a restatement of territory in the invisible world. This body, this room, claimed, already paid for, not available. The weight shifted, not gone immediately, not dramatically, but it shifted. Something changed in the air. Padre Pio would not have been surprised. He would have said, "You felt it. That is enough. Now you know you need the weapon." Not because every 3 a.m. awakening is a demonic encounter. The Church does not teach that, and neither did Padre Pio. Most nights are just sleep, and most disturbances are just the ordinary chaos of a human nervous system moving through rest. But some nights are not that. And the man who has felt the difference, who has woken to something that was not a dream, and was not anxiety, and was not explainable by anything the waking world provides, that man knows. Padre Pio knew. And what Padre Pio knew is what you need to know. When something presents itself from the invisible world, you are not unarmed. You have never been unarmed. You just didn't know what you were holding. Let's pull back now, not away from the personal, but further out, to the scale where Padre Pio's battles find their context, because what happened in his cell at night was not an isolated incident. It was a local expression of something that has been happening since before human history began. The book of Revelation, in chapter 12, describes a war in heaven. The archangel Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon and his angels. And the dragon, the ancient serpent, the devil, Satan, was thrown down to the earth, defeated in heaven, active here. This is not mythology. This is not metaphor in the sense that it refers to nothing real. Catholic theology takes this as an account of a cosmic spiritual event that shapes the condition of the world we live in. The devil is not a free agent pursuing his own kingdom from a position of strength. He is a defeated enemy, operating under a sentence already pronounced, in a time already running out, with a power that is real but bounded, and with a rage proportional to his defeat. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 defined this precisely. The devil is a creature, not an eternal principle of evil, not God's opposite, a being made, who chose corruption, who was condemned, who is now limited. The power of Satan is, nonetheless, not infinite. The Catechism states plainly, CCC 395, he has no dominion that Christ has not already broken. And here is the thing that Padre Pio understood in his bones, in his wounded, bleeding, stigmatized bones, that you need to feel in yours. Every bottle of holy water is a local application of that cosmic victory. Not a bid for victory, not a hope that things might turn out well. An application of something already accomplished. The war in heaven is over. The outcome is settled. What remains is the implementation of that outcome, place by place, room by room, soul by soul, until the end of time. When the Church blesses water, she is not performing a ritual that might work. She is wielding an authority that has already won. The enemy does not react to holy water because it scares him. He has no fear in the human sense. He reacts to it because it burns, because it is the instrument of the authority that condemned him, because the words spoken over it, in Christ's name, in the Church's prayer, name his defeat and apply it to this particular space, this particular threshold, this particular doorframe in this particular house. He reacts the way a prisoner reacts to a court document, not with fear of the paper, but with rage at what the paper represents. And this is why Padre Pio's instruction was so specific. Not pray more generally. Not try to be holier. Go home. Bless the rooms. Do the specific thing that announces, in the invisible world, the specific territory that belongs to Christ. Room by room, door by door. This is not spiritual decoration. This is boundary marking in a war zone. The letter to the Ephesians, chapter 6, lays it out with the plainness of a military briefing. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. Not occasionally, not in extreme cases. This is the normal condition of Christian life. Spiritual warfare is not the province of mystics and exorcists. It is the environment in which every baptized person lives, whether they know it or not. And that word, whether they know it or not, is where Padre Pio's urgency comes from. He spent hours every day sitting across from ordinary people. A woman worried about her marriage, a man who had gambled away his family's savings, a young person who had lost faith somewhere between childhood and adulthood and didn't know how to find it again. These were not extraordinary cases. These were the Tuesday people, the people who make up the body of the Church in every generation. And he could see what was around them. He could see what had settled in the margins of a life that had drifted from the sacraments. He could see the gaps left by unconfessed sin, the way a wall develops cracks that let the cold in. He could see the difference between a household that was spiritually maintained and one that had been left open. And he knew, because he had experienced it personally, because he had fought in his own cell and survived, what the difference looked like when something came through. This is why he was so specific. This is why he sent people home with instructions, not inspiration. Because inspiration fades, and instructions don't. Bless the rooms is something you can do tonight. It is something your children will watch you do and will remember when they have their own houses, and their own children, and their own 3 a.m. waits in the air. The Church has always understood this. The tradition of blessing a home, the rite exists, it's in the Roman ritual, a priest can perform it, you can ask, is not a charming ethnic custom. It is the application of baptismal territory to physical space. It is saying, in the language of the invisible world, this house belongs to Christ. Every room of it, every threshold. The enemy cannot enter claimed territory the way he enters unclaimed territory. He is not stopped absolutely. Padre Pio himself was attacked while surrounded by sacramentals, and no one should imagine that holy water is an automatic guarantee of immunity. It requires cooperation with grace. It requires a life oriented toward God, not just a damp doorframe. But the protection is real. The claim is real. And the difference between a spiritually maintained household and an abandoned one is as real as the difference between a locked door and an open one. The letter of James says it in one line: resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Flee, not renegotiate, not back away slightly. Flee. Padre Pio knew this because he had seen it. He had resisted, not with his own strength, which was never the point, but with the authority of Christ invoked through prayer and sacramentals, and the thing that had come for him in his cell had gone. Not permanently. It came back over years, again and again, because the fight was ongoing and the enemy was persistent. But it went each time he used what he had been given. It fled. That word, flee, is not decorative. It describes what happens in the invisible world when the authority of Christ is genuinely applied. The enemy is not simply discouraged. He is repelled by something he cannot stand. The same authority that cast him out of heaven, the same authority that expelled him from your soul at baptism, is redeclared in this moment, in this place, and the terms of his defeat are reapplied. He cannot negotiate those terms. He cannot ignore them. He can only leave. Padre Pio also said, in the way attributed to him so consistently across the testimony of those who knew him, that the substance is beyond question, even where the precise words are tradition, that the devil is like a rabid dog on a chain. He can only bite you if you walk up to him. He has real power. He has rage and cunning and the experience of centuries. But he is chained, and the chain is held by a hand whose power has no limit. The sacramentals, holy water, the rosary, the sign of the cross, the scapular, the blessed medal, are not magic charms. They are not amulets in the superstitious sense the Church explicitly rejects. They are the specific tools the Church has given her children for living in a world where that chained dog is always somewhere nearby. They are the ways of staying on the right side of the chain. You don't have to understand the full theology of sacramental grace to use them correctly. You don't have to be a mystic or a theologian. You have to be baptized and willing to believe that the Church means what she says when she says these things are real. Padre Pio believed it because he had seen the dog react. He had seen what happened when the water touched something that hated the water. He had seen the chain pull taut, and he had emerged from his cell, morning after morning, still standing, not because he was invincible, but because he was armed. There is a moment in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, when the 72 disciples return from the mission Jesus had sent them on, and they come back astonished. "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." They sound almost disbelieving, as though they expected it not to work. And Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." This is the authority behind the authority. When a priest blesses water in the name of Christ, when the Church prays over salt and water in the prescribed forms, the power invoked is not the priest's power. It is not the Church's power as an institution. It is the authority of the one who saw Satan fall, the one who, by his death and resurrection, definitively broke the enemy's dominion over human nature, the one whose name the demons are subject to. Holy water carries that name. That's what it carries. Not a formula, not a superstition, a name. And the name is the one the Philippians passage says every knee will bow to, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, including the knees of whatever entered a man's room at 3 in the morning. including the knees of whatever has moved into a household through a door left open by years of neglect and hurt, including the knees of whatever screams during an exorcism when the water touches it. Every knee. The water announces the name. That's the whole mechanism. The Church prays over it, invokes the authority of Christ, commands the enemy's departure, blesses the water in Christ's name. And then a woman dips her finger in it at the church door and makes the sign of the cross and walks into the pew. And in the invisible world, laid directly over this one, something happens in the space she just walked through, something that is not nothing, something that is, in fact, everything. Padre Pio spent 50 years living at that border, 50 years of stigmata, wounds that never healed, wounds that bled, wounds that those who touched his gloved hands sometimes described as radiating heat. 50 years of nocturnal battles that his confreres heard and that left marks on his body. 50 years in the confessional, seeing what was in people before they said it, sending them home with specific instructions because he knew exactly what they were walking back into. He did not do any of this from a position of comfortable spiritual certainty. He suffered. He doubted in the dark in the way all mystics eventually doubt, not the faith itself, but whether he was worthy of what God was asking of him. He wrote letters full of that anguish to Padre Agostino, honest letters, the kind you write when you're not performing sanctity, but actually living it. And through all of it, through the suffering, the doubt, the attacks, the exhaustion, he maintained something that the people who came to him felt immediately and never forgot. Certainty about the enemy's ultimate powerlessness, not bravado, not the performance of courage. The deep, earned certainty of a man who has been attacked repeatedly and has survived repeatedly, not because he was stronger, but because what he held was stronger. The certainty of someone who has seen the chain. He was not afraid of the devil. He was alert to him. The way a soldier is alert to an enemy who is real and dangerous, but not afraid, because he understood the order of things. He knew who had won. He knew what the water announced when it was used. He knew what the rosary invoked. He knew what the sign of the cross declared in the invisible world. And so when people came to him with fear, the frightened mother, the doubting scientist, the woman returning after years away, the man who had woken in a wrong room, he didn't offer comfort that minimized the reality of what they feared. He didn't say, "Don't worry, there's nothing there." He said, "Here is the weapon, now pick it up." That was his mercy. Not reassurance that the danger wasn't real. Reassurance that the weapons were real. That the battle was real, but the outcome was settled. That the small bottle of water by your bed, blessed by a priest in the name of Christ, is not a pious gesture. It is a fact about the invisible world stated in the only language the invisible world understands. So, come back to the font now. You've been there 100 times, maybe 1,000. The same cold basin near the same door, the same dip, the same automatic gesture before you take your seat and pick up your missal and settle into the rhythm of the Mass. Do it again, but differently. Do it now, in your mind, and feel what it actually is. Your finger in the water. Water that has been prayed over, commanded over, consecrated in the authority of Christ. Water that carries the terms of your baptism into this moment, into this particular Sunday morning, into the particular weight of whatever you have walked in carrying from the week. The grief, the sin, the doubt, the door left slightly open by the thing you didn't confess, the prayer you skipped, the habit you excused. The water doesn't know about any of that, in the sense of judging it, but it knows what it is. It knows what authority it carries. And when your hand dips into it, and you make the sign of the cross on your forehead, and your chest and your shoulders, you are doing something in the invisible world that the invisible world registers completely. You are redeclaring that this body belongs to Christ, that the baptismal claim on your soul still stands, that whatever is pressing against your life from the side of the invisible world that is not God, whatever it is, whatever shape it's taken, whatever door it found, is not welcome here, not in this body, not in this home, not in these children's rooms. Padre Pio fought in his cell so he could tell you this. He bled from his hands and his feet and his side for 50 years, so that you could understand what you are holding when you touch that water. He didn't fight so you would admire his courage. He fought so you would pick up the weapon. Go home tonight. Fill a small bottle. Bless every room. Bless the doorframe. Bless the bed where your child sleeps. Stand in the hall and make the sign of the cross over every threshold, knowing, not hoping, not wishing, but knowing what you are doing in the invisible world as you do it. The water knows what it is. Now you do too.